Why Enphase Stock Fell is the title of today's presentation. And if you're somebody that's invested in Enphase stock, there's a higher probability that you're a beginner investor. And the reason that we can tell that is because we can go out and take a look at what people are looking for when it comes to Enphase stock. This is pretty typical here on the left where you see what they're asking Google. Notice how nobody asks Google why a stock price increases. They expect that all stock prices will increase. Here you can see they're asking, why is Enphase stock dropping? Why is Enphase down? Why is Enphase down today, going down, dropping down today? You see, people get concerned, particularly newbie investors get concerned when a stock price drops. Here on the right, you can see some other search terms that betray the experience that Enphase investors have. Let's say your typical Enphase investor. It says, how to know Enphase stock will go up and down. Well, the key to understanding whether a stock price will go up or down is hiring a Romanian fortune teller on Fiverr, which is what we did. That's how you can tell. Why Enphase stock has done so well, that's actually a good question. Is Enphase Energy stock a buy, etc.? So today we're going to talk a little bit about the recent fall of Enphase and kind of the bigger picture around that. Now, we've been writing about solar for a long time. Here you can see three relevant articles. SolarEdge and Enphase are two of the biggest solar stocks out there. And we, in April of last year, took a look at both of these side by side, and we chose to invest in SolarEdge over Enphase. The reason that we wanted exposure to solar is quite simple here. So these two charts tell a lot. So on the right-hand side there, you can see the growth in capacity over a particular time frame for wind and solar, and you can see that solar is outpacing wind. And the chart on the left here shows the prediction of what we can expect to see in 2050. You can see there 2019 versus 2050, how solar is a small component of the overall energy mix. And then by 2050, it's going to be the largest component. Now, when we talk bullishly about solar, understand that we can hold multiple beliefs. So here you can see my favorite car. That's a manual transmission V12 that burns gas like nobody's business. I like to drive cars like that. When I get home, I like to fire up the gas stove because gas cooks a whole lot better than electric, and anybody that spends time in a kitchen knows that. I like to eat a big fat steak, and after that I like to take my big dog motorcycle out and give it a good ride. Now, I don't have this vehicle or this motorcycle, but the point is that if I decided to, nothing would keep me from doing that in terms of the guilt that's being imposed by what's largely come down to politics, political parties trying to decide what people should or shouldn't do. Now, I can hold these beliefs and likes while at the same time saying that I really think solar is a great thing. It's clean energy, it's cheap energy, and oftentimes when people hear you say one thing, they expect something else to come out of your mouth because of you're supposed to harbor all your beliefs in one corner. Well, the truth of the matter is that when you look at it, all comes down to the cost of producing energy. We ought to produce energy, the cleanest energy we can at the cheapest cost. This is produced by a firm called Lazard, and it's called the Levelized Cost of Energy Comparison. And you can see here how solar and wind, so note the third item down, solar, PV, that's photovoltaics, utility scale, that's very important, all right? And then you can see at the top, rooftop residential, that's very relevant to what we're going to talk about. See how expensive that is. Now go down to utility scale, that's what we're interested in. And then 3 bars down, you can see where it says wind onshore. See how cost competitive those are? The only thing that comes close there would be nuclear, and then you have gas combined cycle there at the bottom. So people challenge this and say, well, it's BS. Well, this is a unsubsidized analysis of the cost of energy by experts. So if we can't agree that this is a valid starting point, then we're not going to be able to have a discussion. So this is what we look at to see how renewable energies are progressing. So we're very bullish on wind. It happens to be a The largest renewable energy company in the world has been a great success story. That's NextEra Energy. It's a stock we hold. So we think renewable energy has a lot of potential. And when we look at what stocks we want to hold relating to solar, you see here that the two of the largest holdings there, Enphase and SolarEdge, we vetted these top 10 and we decided that these are the two finalists companies that we wanted to look at. You can see here the brief description of each. So Enphase provides residential and commercial solar plus storage solutions. 80% of the revenues are generated from the U.S. And then you can see SolarEdge provides solar equipment with 45% of revenues generated from Europe, 40% from the US, and then 15% from the rest of the world. So we picked SolarEdge over Enphase, particularly because of the geographic diversification, and that actually has proven to be a benefit, and we'll talk about why. Now, why is Enphase stock falling? Well, what do you do when any stock drops? Well, the first thing that you're going to want to do is check to see if they had earnings. Indeed, they did. Then you'll want to start reading those transcripts. Now, you can start with a quick look on Twitter, which will give you some leads, and just find the call transcript. The Seeking Alpha or the Fool will offer these for free. Read it, pay attention to negative language, listen to how the analysts respond to the information provided by management based on the questions they ask, and ignore the sycophants that throw softballs. You see a lot of that. So the Enphase call all came down to this. So this was their Q1 2023 earnings, and revenue decreased 9% sequentially. That's from Q4 due to seasonality, of course, and macroeconomic conditions, and increased 28% year on year. Sell-through here, they said that's sell-through refers to the percentage of a product that's sold by a retailer after being shipped by the supplier. So that means the end consumer is purchasing what they're selling to distributors. And the sell-through, you can see here, decreased quite a bit compared to seasonality. And they talk about here in Europe, they did quite well. Our revenue increased 25% sequentially and more than tripled year on year. Now, our recent piece on SolarEdge talks about how SolarEdge, in their words, the spoils of war, benefited significantly from the energy crisis in Europe, and the company is doing quite well. Everything seemed quite rosy. So as holders of SolarEdge stock, we wanted to see what was going on with Enphase. Well, U.S. exposure, this was taken from our piece last year. 80% of Enphase revenues are generated from the U.S. These benefits could be renewed or changed, or any number of regulatory benefits or risks could affect most of Enphase's revenues. They're very dependent on what happens in the U.S., whatever administration happens to be in power. So you contrast this to SolarEdge, which has just 40% of total revenues coming from the United States, and you see that Enphase is a lot more risky in terms of geographic risk. Now, why did the stock price fall? Well, the Wall Street Journal very succinctly described what's happening here. Enphase Energy points out rising interest rates and new net metering rules in California are casting a shadow over rooftop solar growth prospects. They say low interest rates made such installations affordable for consumers, and state-level policy handsomely rewarded households with such solar systems for selling their excess solar energy back to the grid. Both of those factors are going exactly the wrong direction at the moment. That's what it comes down to. Now, we can deep dive into that more, but the truth of the matter is that these problems are just starting to surface. So we're going to need some time to see how this flushes out over the next several quarters to see what this trend looks like. So when you look at what Enphase does, residential versus commercial, this is something we pointed out in our piece on both companies. We noted that neither company provides any color on their exposure to utility versus residential. Remember, we looked at the earlier graph that showed how expensive residential solar was compared to utility? We're primarily interested in that utility component. We look at SolarEdge, a piece by Morningstar said it's evenly split between residential and commercial. But when you look at what Enphase does, this is from a 2021 presentation, you can see where it largely appears to be residential that they have the exposure to, where they're building this small commercial solar these bits products coming for a serviceable, addressable market of $1 billion, and there's a blue ocean opportunity for off-grid solar and storage. So it appeared that as of several years ago, they were moving or targeting commercial much more heavily, and they were building products for that. So it's hard to believe that the exposure from Enphase is anything but a large majority of residential. Now, when we look at valuations, this is quite interesting. So in April of last year, so roughly a year ago, SolarEdge had a simple valuation ratio, that's market cap divided by annualized revenues, of 8, Enphase of 17. Well, those have roughly halved since then for both firms. You can see that here. Our catalog average is about 6. So SolarEdge would be slightly under average and Enphase would be above average. So it would still have room to drop and be comparatively valued to SolarEdge. So just to conclude, if you're an investor in Enphase, it's too early to see what the damages are. So you want to see a couple more quarters and how this flushes out. If you're on the sidelines and looking at these solar companies and seeing how the valuations have dropped, consider both of them and see which fits your needs, understanding that it's difficult to get that breakdown between commercial and residential for both, and that the best thing you're going to get is the geographical breakdown. Solar is a viable green thesis. You can do good while doing good. That's what we believe. So I'm going to put up another video here that's relevant to this topic, but before you click that, please click the logo on the right here, subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this today.